So the big story this week in US-Israel relations is that the United States and Israel are quietly rewriting the foundation of their defense relationship. There's a provision buried in the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, that would change how America and Israel work together militarily, not in terms of deployments or operational cooperation like we saw in Iran. No. About technology and the defense industry. And there's a lot of screaming and yelling about this. Israel's Ministry of Defense, I should just pull this up on screen here, that Israel's Ministry of Defense has been talking about this for a while. Let me add this to the stage. Let's do this properly. Here we go. U.S. and Israel move to redefine their defense partnership, launching talks on a new chapter in defense cooperation. Okay, you see, and the key, this is a press release from Israel's Ministry of Defense from about a month and a half ago. The new framework reflecting the strategic vision of Israel's Prime Minister and Minister of Defense is designed to strengthen the IDF's qualitative military edge through expanded joint investment in research, development, and co-production, deepen the U.S.-Israel partnership demonstrated during Operation Roaring Lion, and gradually transition from aid to a completely reciprocal partnership. And we've talked about this many times, about how Prime Minister Netanyahu has said this a lot, that he wants to move away from the aid relationship. All right, so what we're seeing now in this, and what's happening with this NDAA that we're going to get into all the details of in this video, is the first stage of that. The U.S.-Israel relationship in terms of defense cooperation has really been one of aid, where the United States has provided $3.8 billion of aid to Israel every year. And that's based on a 10-year memorandum of understanding that was signed at the end of the Obama administration. And that expires in 2028. It went into effect after Obama left office, but it expires soon. So this is now the effort to replace that relationship with a new framework. So everyone's talking about this issue right now. A lot of critics of Israel are talking about it, and we're going to get into all of that. And almost everyone talking about it has an agenda. The Council of American Islamic Relations, CARE, is calling it Israel first and a sellout of American sovereignty. We're also hearing that from the right. The Quincy Institute, no friend of Israel, is calling it cooperation without oversight. On the other hand, you have AIPAC that says, oh, this is the greatest thing. It's a strengthening of the alliance. I don't want to spin this. I want to try to stay away from spin. Here's what I want to do in this video. I'm going to tell you what is in this bill. What are they actually arguing about? What is the content of it? What it is and what it isn't. And you'll have more tools to decide for yourself. I have my opinion, of course, and I'll share that. But let's get into it. What's in the bill? Here we go. What's in the bill? What's in it for Israel? What's in it for America? What the critics are saying and where things stand. That's what we're going to go through in this video. So let's get right to it. The provision we're talking about was called Section 224 of the House version of the National Defense Authorization Act, and it's now been changed to 219 in some drafts. It's called the United States, this section of the NDAA is called the United States Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. And there's a companion bill that goes along with it called the Defense Partnership Act. It creates a formal structure. Here's what the bill does. A formal structure, including an executive agent inside the Pentagon to coordinate research, development, and production between American and Israeli defense industries. And it folds Israeli technology into the American defense industry supply chain. Okay, so let's take a look at a section of the bill on screen. Let's pull it up. Here we go. Here it is. So this is, United States Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative establishment. The Secretary of Defense shall designate an executive agent, as such term is defined by the Department of Defense Directive, responsible for synchronizing cooperative efforts between the United States and Israel to expand and accelerate bilateral defense technology research, development, testing, evaluation, integration, and industrial cooperation by identifying jointly developed or Israeli origin technologies with operational utility for potential integration into United States systems and programs of record. This is not about integrating the full military. Okay, this is what it's about. It's about research and development and of technologies. That's the bill in black and white. Israeli technology built into American weapons systems. The bill also lists which domain this covers, and that's a little bit, that comes a little bit later down here, and it gives this list. And this listing, it's everything from drones and missile defense to AI, quantum, cyber, biotech. It's a bulleted list. Okay, counter unmanned systems, anti-tunneling and subterranean threats. These are kind of the things that Israel's been dealing with, right? Lots of drones, lots of unmanned robotics, tunnels, subterranean threats, missile and air defense, artificial intelligence, quantum, machine learning, autonomous systems, directed energy and advanced sensing, cyber defense and electronic warfare, biotechnology and biomanufacturing, data fusion and contested logistics, defense industrial base cooperation and co-production, plus a catch-all, the last one in the list, is other emerging technologies as jointly agreed. Okay, so this is not a narrow pilot program. It's basically every frontier technology category that the Pentagon cares about right now. Now, some of the coverage is calling this a military merger. Steve Bannon said that the other day. He says, "Oh, they're merging their militaries. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. That they're merging the militaries." Listen, that's not accurate. I respectfully disagree. Steve and I have had many conversations over the years, and we sometimes agree and we sometimes disagree. Many of you may know I'm a regular guest on his show, and reasonable people can disagree. And I don't believe that military merger is accurate. I just read you what it says. It doesn't merge command structures. Israel's not, there's no like NATO-like provision where they have to come to each other's aid. It's not a treaty. This is a deepening of industrial and technological integration. The next stage of something that's already happening for decades with programs like the Iron Dome and David Sling. This just gives it a permanent institutional home. And it lines up with what Israel's own Ministry of Defense said in June, as I showed you that story on the screen, that they're launching government-to-government talks to get ahead of the end of the memorandum of understanding, the current arrangement ending in 2028. They want to set up the new relationship. And what they said in that press release was that they want to move from aid to reciprocal partnership. Now, for decades, the U.S.-Israel relationship has basically been one direction. It's or sort of. I mean, in terms of the finances of it, foreign military aid, billions of dollars every year. But aid, and it helped Israel, certainly did. But aid also creates dependency. It's, there's all sorts of political conditions that are attached to it, which is in fact how we got to the aid in the first place. All of the ramping up of aid. I've talked about this many times. I've written about it. If you go to my X account at Rabbi PW, you'll see that the pinned post there, you can read my article that I wrote a while ago, probably about a year ago, about how Israel has to get off of the aid from America. It will be in Israel's best interest because it puts Israel's defense posture, it makes it hostage to whoever's sitting in the White House. And we saw what happened with that, with the Biden-Harris administration. It was rough sledding for Israel in the early stages of the war. Now, I've said for a long time, again, I said it on the Charlie Kirk show, that Israel is better off moving away from dependence on American aid, not because America isn't a friend, but because dependency is a strategic vulnerability. If Israel, Israel able to defend itself without asking permission is a stronger ally, not a weaker one. So this is that shift that we've been calling for, that people like myself have been calling for, to move away from aid and more to a peer-to-peer partnership relationship between U.S. and Israel. Those of us who don't want aid, we don't want to sever the U.S.-Israel relationship. We want it to shift. And this whole situation right now is that shift starting to happen in real time. Instead of being a recipient of American charity, Israel becomes a partner inside the American defense industrial base. Israeli companies get direct access to U.S. defense contracts and supply chains. Israeli innovation, Iron Dome, cyber, AI-driven targeting. Right? This all gets built into American systems instead of just being sold to America as a finished product. And America does buy finished products from Israel. This is a fundamentally healthier relationship than an annual aid handout. So that's what's in it for Israel. What's in it for America? Let's flip it around, because this is also not a favor to Israel. America gets something very real out of this relationship. There's a reason they're doing it. Israel has spent the last 2 years fighting a live multi-front war, a very complex war with all sorts of different arenas against Iran and its proxies. That combat-tested technology, refined under real fire, under real combat conditions, drone defense, missile interception, AI-assisted intelligence on the battlefield. And I know from soldiers and from combat and from field officers that they have changed drastically during the course of this war. Israel has changed its tactics and brought in all sorts of different technologies, tried all sorts of different things. Lots of robotics have been used. Okay. America gets access to all of this battlefield-proven innovation that would cost, and R&D and testing that would cost billions and take years to build from scratch. And Israel already built it. Israel is the testing ground. Israel knows how it operates, how it works, what works and doesn't work under pressure. And there's also a hard strategic logic here for America. Iran, China, Russia, they're all racing forward on these same technologies. So for America to lock in deep, permanent integration with the country doing the most advanced applied field work on these technologies in real combat conditions is a serious force multiplier for America. And it doesn't cost America anything. Okay, that fact that Israel, not America, is doing the most advanced applied work here is exactly what a lot of the critics of this on the right, friends of mine, it's what a lot of them miss, because they assume, and this is like a blind spot that a lot of patriotic Americans have, they assume that America is automatically the leader in everything, defense technology included. And it's not true across the board. It's not true about everything. And America doesn't want to lose access to the innovation and the field research that Israel, they don't want to lose, that Israel has. Israel's not required to bring its best technology to the United States first. It does, but it's not required to do that. Especially now, Israel in the last year and a half, 2 years, has started selling lots of air defenses and all sorts of technologies to lots of other countries. That's part of why Israel wants to get off of the aid. It's part, Israel's defense industry is making a lot of money for the country. Something like $6 to $8 billion in air defenses were sold last year to the Germans. There's also the Greeks bought another $4 billion. I've shared these numbers many times. But Israel has a lot of relationships when it comes to defense technology. And the United States wants to lock in right now that they get first access and that they are there with Israel with the first access to Israeli innovation and technology. And Israel is ahead of everyone in this technology. And if you pretend otherwise, and you pretend that the US doesn't need Israeli technology, you are willfully blind. That's not patriotism. It's just wrong on the facts. And by the way, the bill that we're talking about actually pretty much says this explicitly. Here, let me pull up that section. It's down here. It's in the last section of it on transparency. And look what it says here. It talks about that part of the reporting of the Secretary of Defense to Congress on this is a description of how these efforts contribute to United States technological and military supremacy. Meaning that's part of the intention of this whole thing. The stated purpose in the legislative text is for the United States to maintain its military supremacy because the most advanced technology in these areas is coming out of Israel, and they know this. This bill is not written as a favor to Israel. Whatever you think of the mechanism, that's the intent on the page. Now, if you listen to the loudest critics of this, especially on the isolationist right, And we're going to listen to some in a moment. I'm going to play you a clip. That's why I'm wearing these headphones. I always wear them when I play clips. You'd think that folding a foreign country's defense industry into America's own was some radical, dangerous idea. Oh my gosh, we're merging our militaries, and it's a compromise on American sovereignty. So let me ask an obvious question that none of them are asking. Where's the outrage over America already doing this exact same thing with Canada and the UK and Australia and New Zealand? Oh yeah, it already exists. It's called the National Technology and Industrial Base, the NTIB. You probably never heard of it, but you don't have to take my word for it because it's defined in the companion bill. I mentioned there's a companion bill to this clause, to this Israel thing in the NDAA we've been talking about, called the United States-Israel Defense Partnership Act. It's from 2025, from last year. It's the precursor to this. Let me pull that up on screen and just show you what I'm talking about. Okay, it's right here. Here's the bill. Okay, this is the, what's it called again? The United States-Israel Defense Partnership Act. And in this bill, which calls for all of this integration that we're talking about, look what it says. One of the goals of the bill, and it starts with this, the cooperative program and the technology, seek to engage Israel's Ministry of Defense on the ascension of Israel into the national technology and industrial base, currently defined in law as the persons and organizations engaged in research, development, production, integration, services, or information technology activities conducted within the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Okay? That's what this is. That's the club, straight from the bill text. Deep, formal, industrial level integration between America's defense sector and 4 other countries. And I didn't hear anyone on the right in America calling that a threat to American sovereignty. It's treated as completely normal because it's completely normal. Now, here's why the unique Israel entanglement framing is at least partly wrong. Israel isn't even in this NTIB with these other countries yet. Getting into it took 4 countries. It took these 4 countries years of a formal, deliberative process. And the same companion bill says, it says the quiet part out loud, right? It directs what I just read to you. It directs the Pentagon to seek to engage Israel's Ministry of Defense on the ascension of Israel into the NTIB. That's the goal. Get Israel to the same point that the Canada and the UK and Australia, that they're already in. So on substance, this looks a lot like what America already does with other allies. But there's a real procedural difference between this and the NTIB. And we'll get into it in a minute because it's the strongest part of the case against the bill. Okay, so now what I want, and that's what I want to get into now. I want to get into the pushback against the bill, and I want to give it its full weight. So let's start with the sharpest version of it from someone fighting his own party over it, and that would be Congressman Thomas Massie. He's no friend of Israel, and he went on the Redacted News podcast yesterday, I believe, and he laid out the case against this provision. Okay, and so let's play that clip, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, here's Thomas Massie. Pull them up on screen, and here we go.
Before we get into the details of that, I want to talk about the NDAA because the big vote tomorrow. What do you believe Americans need to understand about what Congress is about to approve right now? Many Americans out national parks visiting, it's the last hurrah of summer, and quietly, sort of buried inside this enormous bill is Section 219, which, well, I'll give you the floor on what is about to happen in Washington.
Well, first of all, the NDAA stands for the National Defense Authorization Act. And it's one of the few bills that passes every year. I've been here 14 years. There have been 14 NDAAs. So you can set your clock on the fact that this bill will pass. So anything that gets in it is, dangerous as a cocked gun. It's going to become law. Well, this bill is hundreds of pages long. And, in one of those hundreds of pages, it's actually 5 pages long, is Section 219. And it was Section 224, but it's now Section 219. And it calls for the integration of our military technology and the supply chains that produce our, high-tech military equipment to be integrated with Israel's. Now, we don't have this kind of, bilateral agreement with any other country in the world. And I would argue that we shouldn't, in order to protect our sovereignty and to protect our national secrets. If you wanted to share one thing at a time, let's say, we wanted to collaborate on missile defense systems, I think that's fine. The president can do that, just by virtue of controlling the military. But what they're doing here is legislatively, they are appointing a person. I joke that this person will eventually be a cabinet member, but right now it's a lower level position who will be in charge of the integration. And that means that this project will have a lifespan that outlasts the commander-in-chief. Regardless of who the next president is, this provision lasts forever. And it's in the National Defense Authorization Act. It's coming to a vote. A lot of people have, saw this. I saw this back in June and offered an amendment. By the way, there are 1,400 amendments that have been offered to the National Defense Authorization Act here in the House. My amendment was amendment number 2. I was the second person to offer an amendment to the NDAA, and that's because I saw this troubling provision in there. Now, what they've decided to do is they've decided to block my amendment. So there will be no vote and no debate on Section 219 and whether it should be in the NDAA or whether it should not be in the NDAA. And today there was a procedural vote that barely passed here in the House, but it passed on party lines. I was the only Republican dissenter ultimately. Initially we had about 5 Republicans who revolted on this vote for various reasons, maybe not associated with Section 219. But at the end of the day, I was the last Republican standing opposing this procedural measure to bring the bill to the floor without a vote on stripping Section 219. What will happen is tomorrow there will be a vote on final passage of the National Defense Authorization Act. It will still have to pass the Senate. It hasn't passed the Senate. Some people are putting their trust in the Senate because it failed in the Senate once. I would tell you, never trust the Senate. Stuff over there can stay bottled up for a year and then it can pass within 5 seconds. They pass bills in the Senate using email. So I would caution you not to think that this will get stopped in the Senate. But even if the Senate passes a bill, an NDAA that doesn't have a Section 219 in it, the House and the Senate will conference their 2 bills. And it's quite likely that this could survive that conference and become the ultimate law.
So if this was, it's Israel, but if it was China or Russia, do you think that there would be any kind of outrage on Capitol Hill?
There would be absolute outrage. Even if you take one of our...
think of the premise of that question. China and Russia are enemies of the United States. And so in the mind of these people, Israel should maybe be in the same category.
Longtime allies that has been an ally since before Israel was a country. Let's say it was Great Britain. We don't have this kind of thing codified into law with a country like Great Britain. And so I think it's dangerous to take a country of 10 million people. And some people try to say this is analogous to NATO. Well, there's no real reciprocity advantage to the country with 350 million people to having this bilateral agreement with a country of 10 million people, 10 billion people. It ties you 10 million versus 350 million. It ties you into something, into engagements. And when you couple these supply chains, that also makes it problematic to try to decouple.
Okay. He's saying that there's no reciprocal advantage. There's no reciprocal advantage to the United States from this. And I showed you, I discussed with you what the reciprocal advantage is. He also said that it ties America into engagements. It does not. This is about development of technologies. It's about being it's about industry and developing new weapons, new weapon systems. It has nothing to do with getting involved in any engagement. And he also, of course, says that America has no such relationship with anyone else. And of course, Massey is one of the most consistently anti-Israel voices in Congress, but that doesn't mean he's wrong about everything. Now, twice in that clip, he said that America doesn't have this kind of relationship codified into law with any other country, not even Great Britain. He named them. And that's not exactly accurate. The NTIB that I just told you about is codified in law right now in 10 USC section 4864. And it already ties the U.S. defense industrial base to the UK, Canada, and Australia. But here's the procedural difference that I flagged a minute ago. And I'll give Massey credit. He's onto something real with this executive agent in the Pentagon. In fact, I'll say this. The only distinction between what is about to happen with U.S. and Israel, this merger, oh my gosh, we're merging our militaries. The only difference between this and what America already does with the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, the only difference is that there's going to be an executive agent in the Pentagon to move the integration forward that he talked about. No NTIB country has a legislatively created position with authority to override other parts of the Pentagon, whose entire job is pushing the integration with one specific country. So he's right about that. And he's also right that that position will outlast any single administration once it's law. Once it's written into law, it doesn't disappear with the next president. That's a genuine distinction. Now, and that genuine distinction, that genuine point he's making is part of his overall point, which is grossly overstated. Now, we have to answer the question, why did Congress build in a position like this that can override other offices in the Pentagon? Why did they do this? So here's the simple version. The Pentagon has offices that each do their own cautious job, like they vet technology risks, they handle export licenses, they run procurement timelines. And any one of these offices could bureaucratically slow things down or kill something just by the regular bureaucratic, doing their job. So this position that is being created for this arrangement with Israel, the reason it's being created is to keep the effort from getting derailed and getting stuck in the bureaucratic gridlock. It doesn't mean that there's no oversight. The bill still requires a 6-month briefing to Congress, annual reports through 2030, public unclassified updates. And it doesn't mean that U.S. security gets compromised. The State Department's own export control office will still operate independently, and everything will still have to follow existing law. And they're still going to oversee what happens with everything that is developed by this technology. What this position that they're creating in the Pentagon does is it overrides bureaucratic foot dragging in the Pentagon that would slow things down. Okay, it has nothing to do with it. There's no compromise on the laws that protect sensitive technology or protect American U.S. security. And it's not just Massey. The Quincy Institute and Responsible Statecraft raised the related concern. Look, aid, whatever its flaws are, this is their argument. Whatever the flaws in aid is visible. It's a number, Congress votes on it. There can be conditions attached to it, and there always are. But once you move cooperation into the Pentagon, into research and procurement channels, it's a lot harder for Congress or the public to track or to put conditions on. Okay, it's just harder to see. So listen, Massey's attempt to strip the provision out of the NDAA got blocked on party line vote, as he said. It's still being somewhat contested, you see, because you have, the breakdown of the parties. His oversight concern, it's a legitimate concern, but I disagree with him. I disagree with Massey and the other critics in the framing that this entangles America more than the aid relationship already did. That America is now going to be more entangled with Israel because of this, losing their sovereignty. It's just not true. I'd argue the opposite. Because the aid gave America leverage in Israel's decision-making, but also it would mean that if Israel needed weapons, they were forced to get them from America because of the way that MOU was written. That would mean that America was sort of party to everything Israel did. And America was far more entangled because of the aid than they will be in this situation. A partnership built on shared technology and industrial capacity is a relationship between two sovereign allies, and it's a much healthier relationship. So where this stands right now, the provision has cleared the House. It still needs the Senate. Even if the Senate were to drop the provision, the conference committee could bring it back. Okay, and we'll keep our eyes on what happens there. Here's, in the big picture, what looks like just an item in the defense budget is a real inflection point. The U.S. and Israel are moving from a patron-client relationship built on foreign aid to a genuine industrial partnership between two sovereign allies. That is what is happening here. This is not a merger. It's a maturing of the relationship, and it's long overdue. Whether Congress lets it through in its current form, we'll find out. And whatever, we'll find out. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing, liking, subscribing. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Maybe I'm not reading this right. Maybe I'm missing something. Feel free to disagree with me. That's fine. And God bless you all.